Good afternoon. I'd like to call the July 6, 2020 meeting of the Big Cypress Basin Board to order. Our first item is the Pledge of Allegiance. And I would like to remind staff and the board to unmute themselves and then remute yourself after the pledge. And I'd like to ask Mr. Dan Waters to please lead us in the pledge.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dan. I have a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. We really appreciate everyone joining us for this public meeting. As you have noticed, we are practicing social distancing according to the leadership and guidance of the CDC, our governor, and local government. The health and safety of our community is our top priority, and we are pleased you are joining us today via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to address the board may use the raise the hand feature on Zoom. If members of the public are having trouble and need help, please go to our website, sfwmd.gov, and click the orange Ask Us button at the top of the page. If you are using a phone and would like to comment, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute. Board members, I'm going to ask you to also use the raise the hand feature during the meeting, except when making a motion or seconding a motion. In those instances, please unmute yourself, announce your name, and then make the motion or second. During the presentations, you can raise your hand at any time during the meeting if you have a question, and I will call on you. For the actual voting, I will be conducting a roll call vote. Please unmute yourself to cast your vote when I call your name. Ms. Keeler, are there any agenda revisions for this meeting?
No, ma'am, there is not.
Okay, abstentions by board members for items on the agenda. Ms. Najan de Laton, do you have any abstentions or disclosures?
Oops, I do not.
Mr. Waters?
I do not either.
And I do not have any. Thank you. The next item is the approval of the minutes for the May 22nd meeting. Are there any board member changes to the May 22nd meeting minutes?
No.
I don't see any hands. Could I have then a motion and a second to approve the May 22nd meeting minutes?
I will make a motion to approve the minutes of May 22nd meeting.
And I'll second that motion.
Thank you very much. All in favor, please vote by saying aye.
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 And aye for me. That's 3-0, the approval of the minutes. Moving on to general public comments. This portion of the meeting is the first public comment period. Members of the public, if you would like to speak, you may use the raise the hand feature in Zoom. If you are using a phone and would like to comment, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute yourself. When you are called on, staff will unmute your line for you. There is a 3-minute comment guideline that will apply. You will see a timer on your screen, and in the absence of the timer, I will let you know when your time is up, and we appreciate you abiding by this. Yvette, are there any public speakers who have raised their hands to speak?
Madam Chair, I have no raised hands.
Okay, we'll give a few more seconds here to see if anyone has some difficulty with raising their hand. Yvette, do you see any raised hands?
None, Madam Chair.
Okay, great. Then we'll move forward to our first presentation of the agenda, which are the impacts and management of invasive and nuisance vegetation in the Big Cypress Basin. and that presentation will be given by Leroy Rogers. Go ahead, Leroy.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members and members of the public. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to the BCB Governing Board today on the topic of invasive and nuisance vegetation. So today I plan on discussing the impacts of invasive nuisance plants to Florida and the district's mission and how we manage them with a particular focus on the species and types of vegetation most problematic here in the Big Cypress Basin. So most of us are aware that Florida, particularly South Florida, has an invasive species problem. We all know about the high-profile organisms like Burmese pythons that receive a lot of media attention, and justifiably so. But there are other species on the landscape that are very problematic, especially in the plant kingdom. And these are the species I'll be talking about today. Okay, so there are numerous often misapplied terms that are used on this topic. So I want to take a moment for a couple of quick definitions. When we talk about invasive plants, we're referring to those species that are not native to South Florida, and their introduction is causing economic harm, human health concerns, or more commonly in our case, harm to Florida's unique native environments. Nuisance vegetation, on the other hand, are typically native plant species that, for whatever reason, have become problematic in the relation to the district's mission. An example of this would be the aggressive invasive-like growth of our native cattail in the northern Everglades, where the plant is overtaking sawgrass marsh plant communities due to excessive nutrient pollution. In other cases, nuisance vegetation may simply be a species whose presence in itself somehow interferes with district infrastructure and operations. So let's discuss the types of impacts that we see and why some species can be so problematic to the district. With regard to our native ecosystems, very generally speaking, invasive plants can cause substantial and negative changes to ecosystem structure and important processes such as nutrient cycling, fire, and water movement, just as some examples. In the two photos shown here, we see the dramatic transformation of an open, relatively diverse Everglades marsh following years of invasion by the highly invasive Australian tree Melaleuca. And you can clearly see through this invasion process, the open marsh has been converted to nearly a single species Melaleuca swamp. As a result of this, the ecosystem has experienced a loss of native plant diversity, negative changes to wildlife habitat, and in the case of endangered or threatened species, additional stress on already vulnerable populations. And as lead managers or co-managers of over 780,000 acres of natural areas and project lands within the district, of which over 100,000 acres, I believe, are within the Big Cypress Basin, it's really critical that the district is managing these invaders to protect Florida's unique habitats. In addition to impacts to our natural areas, invasive and nuisance vegetation can also impact the district's capacity to provide flood protection and water supply, a core mission of our agency. So on the left, you can hopefully see that invasive Australian pines growing along the Green Canal were blown into the canal during a storm event. This plant in particular is very prone to blow over in high winds, and it's caused significant problems in our canal system throughout the district following major storm events in the past. Many aquatic plants, like the escaped aquarium plant Rotala, shown here on the right growing in the Faca Union Canal, can accumulate incredible amounts of biomass, and this accumulated vegetation can substantially impede our ability to move water through the 143 miles of canals in the BCB system. And sometimes invasive and nuisance vegetation can cause very direct physical damage to our infrastructure. These two photos show how accumulated vegetation that came from a private canal into a district canal in the Treasure Coast region literally tore out pilings from a farmer's bridge. So sometimes these impacts are very immediate and not subtle at all. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the priority species and vegetation types that we deal with here in the Big Cypress region. I'll start with floating aquatic invasive plants. These are free-floating plants that are not rooted to the soil, and they move across open water habitats by water current and wind. By far the most common invasive floating plant species in South Florida are water hyacinth and water lettuce. And as you can see in the photo, these plants can aggressively colonize open water habitats and if uncontrolled, can significantly interfere with water control operations, boat navigation, and various water-based recreational activities. In terms of environmental impacts, the proliferation of floating aquatic vegetation can result in numerous undesirable changes to aquatic ecosystems. As the abundance of these plants increases, light penetration into the water column does decline quite significantly, resulting in the suppression of native aquatic plants, as well as changes to water quality, especially dissolved oxygen and pH. We also see changes to fish populations, especially declines in some of our larger game fish. In addition, these floating plants produce copious amounts of plant litter, which rapidly decomposes into a fine organic sediment that's easily resuspended into the water column, further degrading water quality. Another common type of vegetation found in the BCB is submerged aquatic invasive plants. As the name implies, these plants grow in the water column, and unlike floating aquatic plants, are rooted to the soil. These plant species often grow aggressively through the entire water column, and if uncontrolled, can significantly impede our ability to convey water through the system. In addition to seriously impacting our capacity to move water, the plants impede boating, fishing, and other water recreation. The photo on the right shows the very well-known invasive plant hydrilla growing in the Curry Canal. This is one of the most serious and widespread aquatic invasive plants globally, and it's been very problematic at times here in the Big Cypress Basin. I should mention that there are a number of other invasive submerged aquatic species found in the BCB. They have similar growth forms and invasive characteristics, and the district is actively managing all of those other species as well. Okay, moving on to terrestrial habitats. I'll start by saying that there are more than 30 highly invasive plant species documented to occur in natural areas in our levees within the BCB region that the district is currently managing. There's not enough time, of course, to cover them all, so I chose one species, Brazilian pepper, to kind of represent this diverse group of invaders. This highly invasive tree has been established in Florida for well over a century now, and it is often found forming dense thickets along roadsides and other areas with disturbed soils. But the plant also aggressively overtakes other less disturbed natural areas, such as Picayune Strand State Forest, where it's a very significant problem. As you can see in the photo on the left, Brazilian pepper stands will starve out the understory of light and quickly outcompete our native plants. This results in a loss of wildlife habitat, though some animals do eat the abundant fruit that the plant produces, and also results in changes to natural fire regimes, which further degrades our fire-dependent ecosystems. And lastly, because the plant is in the same family as poison ivy, there are some human health concerns with Brazilian pepper due to occasional allergic skin reactions. Okay. So now I'd like to move on to the different control tools that we have available to the district for managing vegetation in our canals, levees, and natural areas. These tools generally fall into 5 categories shown here, and I'll go through each of these briefly. But first, I want to emphasize that we are often very limited in the number of control tools available to us for a given invasive species. And for this reason, the district maintains active collaboration with universities, industries, and partner agencies such as FWC and the National Park Service to help develop and redefine these much needed tools. So starting with prevention might not sound like a control tool per se, but taking actions to limit the spread of invasive species can really help control costs and prevent small problems from becoming a big problem later down the road. There are a number of ways the district practices prevention. For example, our staff and contractors are instructed to inspect equipment such as airboats and mowers for plant hitchhikers and to remove the seeds and plant fragments before entering or leaving our properties. This type of decontamination is especially important for invasive plant species that have limited distribution within the district. Often these species are the focus of interagency rapid response efforts aimed at trying to contain these species within a limited area, or in some cases, if we're lucky, potentially eradicating the species from Florida entirely. Our biologists also assist academic institutions with developing risk assessment tools for newly established non-native plants. These tools can help determine which new species are more likely to be problematic. And this is really important to us because with so many new species being introduced to Florida on a yearly basis, we need a way to prioritize our rapid response efforts when staffing and other resources are often very limited. Finally, the district actively partners with other organizations to get the word out to the public on the importance of preventing the spread of invasive plants, because at the end of the day, without awareness and active involvement from the public, prevention is not likely to be effective. Okay, the next tool is biological control. This is the practice of using other organisms to control an invasive species. One of the reasons that non-native species can become so aggressive in a new area is that the species has been released from its co-evolved enemies, such as insects, that occur in the plant's native home range. So what biological control is seeking to do is to reunite an invasive plant with its co-evolved enemies so that the plant's competitive edge over native species is reduced. And when it's successful, it's not always, but when it is successful, these agents provide self-sustaining control. And while they are unlikely to completely eradicate the invasive plant, they can reduce our reliance on, or in some cases even enhance, other control tools, as I'll discuss in a moment. The district has long-standing partnerships with other agencies and research institutions like the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the University of Florida, who conduct careful research into potential agents to ensure that the insect in question will only feed on the targeted invasive plant and presents no harm to humans or to agriculture. And once an insect is found to only survive if the targeted invasive plant is available to them, these researchers will then seek approval from federal and state regulators to allow release into Florida. Once that happens, the district will then partner with the USDA or whoever the researching entity is to arrange for the release of these insects into strategic locations to meet our purposes. Apologize, there's a little lag in the advance here. Next is mechanical control. If I can get to the slide, here we go. Also, basically, we're talking here about physical removal of vegetation using equipment or manual labor. Most commonly in the BCB, the district utilizes harvesters to physically remove accumulated aquatic vegetation from our canals. One of the benefits of aquatic plant harvesters is the immediate removal of large quantities of biomass, which, if we left in the water, could cause significant water quality concerns and buildup of unwanted organic sediments. Of course, we generally try to avoid allowing vegetation to accumulate to such a degree in our canals, but when this does happen and it gets away from us, harvesting provides very immediate and effective results. We do need to consider several other aspects of aquatic plant harvesting, including what to do with the large quantities of vegetation that's removed, the potential spread of plant fragments, which can cause new infestations downstream, and also the potential for damage to desirable native vegetation. Okay, with chemical control, here we're referring to the use of EPA-approved herbicides. These act on metabolic functions specific to plants and not to animals. These herbicides are applied by ground application from trucks, boats, or on foot, where applicators can use backpack sprayers or small spray bottles for precise applications of herbicide, as shown in the photo there. At times when the treatment area is very large and heavily infested with invasive plants, we may apply herbicides airily from helicopters, though much less frequently. We have found that chemical control is a very effective means of removing and maintaining invasive plants at low levels. And in the case of some herbicides, we are actually able to selectively control certain invasive species with little or no damage to our native plants. Of course, the district must be aware of the potential public concerns about herbicides and their excessive use. And for this reason, we spend a lot of time training our staff and contractors to ensure herbicides are used judiciously and in accordance with the EPA label. And the final control tool category is cultural control. This may involve any number of management activities that somehow changes environmental conditions in a way that stresses the invasive plant, but otherwise causes no significant harm to other parts of the ecosystem. The most common example of cultural controls used here in the BCB is prescribed fire. As many of you probably know, a lot of Florida's ecosystems are fire dependent, and proper application of prescribed fire not only improves the overall health of the ecosystem, but if timed right, can also stress a particular invasive plant population, which then potentially improves our efficacy or ability to control with other methods such as chemical or mechanical control. Other control methods may include controlling excessive nutrient inputs, changing water stages in wetlands, and planting desirable species following the removal of invasive plants. Okay, so now I want to close the presentation by taking some time to talk a little about how we incorporate these various tools into a comprehensive strategy here at the district. An important part or concept in the district's program is a strategy known as Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. In very general terms, IPM is the practice of deliberately integrating multiple control tools to achieve a synergistic outcome in managing an invasive plant. So in other words, for each invasive species, we may have a unique set of control tools that, when combined in a certain order or timing, controls the plant better than any single control tool would alone. And while we use the IPM method for most of our vegetation management activities, including aquatic plants in our canal system, a very successful example is the district's IPM program for Melaleuca, as depicted in this graphic here. By combining mechanical, chemical, cultural, biological, and prevention and outreach tools in particular sequences, the district and other agencies have really achieved excellent control of this highly invasive plant in many parts of the BCB and elsewhere. And to give you an example of how effective IPM can be, I want to share these two photos of Melaleuca growing in the BCB at an experimental study site. What you're looking at here is two study plots in the Melaleuca infestation area where several biocontrol agents were already present in both sites. To demonstrate the impact of biocontrol, the researchers used insecticides to prevent the insects from feeding on the Melaleuca in the plot on the left, while the plot on the right was simply left alone. And after roughly 2 years or so, you can see on the left the effect of removing the biocontrol agents, very dense, aggressive growing Melaleuca. And on the right, where the insects were not removed, very limited growth of Melaleuca. And yes, if you're paying attention to the photo, you can see that there are some Melaleuca still there, but the presence of their co-evolved enemies has left them stunted and sparse. And this excellent, though incomplete control then allows us to come in with mechanical or chemical control at much less cost and less herbicide use. Okay, another key aspect of the district's management strategy is the concept of maintenance control. Since widely established invasive plants are rarely eradicated from Florida, the expectation is that we must conduct follow-up control in perpetuity moving into the future. So what maintenance control emphasizes is frequent retreatments of invasive plants to keep the population at the lowest feasible level over time. This is a central tenet to our program because it's been repeatedly shown in various cases to reduce the overall management cost with less herbicide use, easier to manage infestations, lower disturbance to the ecosystem, and overall improvement to the habitat. For this reason, the district applies maintenance control strategies to manage invasive species throughout our program, both in natural areas and in our canal levee system. To give you an example of just how important maintenance control is to the district's bottom line, I pulled together some data to show that shows control efforts in two areas: Water Conservation Area 1 on the left, which is not under maintenance control. It has a lot of invasive plants there. And Water Conservation Area 3A on the right, which has been under maintenance control for invasive plants for many, many years now. I know there's a fair amount of information here, but you can see that maintenance control on the right in Area 3A, our contractors are now able to cover much more acreage in search of invasive plants, which is shown in the blue vertical bar, and ends up applying much less herbicide in terms of acreage, which is shown in the orange bar. But really the bottom line is captured very well in the white text boxes, and I want to draw your attention to that. When we achieve maintenance control of invasive plants, the cost to control them is reduced dramatically, as is the quantity of herbicide used, and in the case here, by orders of magnitude. And if you're looking at the $40 per acre cost for Area 1, which is not under maintenance control, it might not sound like a lot, but it's important to remember that Area 1 is over 147,000 acres inside, so this cost can really add up for large areas. So this is just one example of how we use maintenance control strategies to achieve responsible use of public resources to protect our natural areas and maintain our water supply and flood control system. But I think it really speaks to the importance of maintenance control. Okay, so in closing, invasive and nuisance vegetation present a significant threat to the district's mission, both operating water delivery system and managing and restoring our conservation lands. The district's vegetation management program utilizes multiple control tools as they are available to us. And we're seeing that through our experiences over the years that optimal results are being achieved when we strategically integrate those tools while progressing towards maintenance level control. And that concludes my presentation. I do apologize if I went over on my time.
Thank you, Leroy. That was an excellent presentation, and I'm going to open it up for board questions at this time. Are there any questions by the board members? I don't see any hands raised. I have a couple of questions, Leroy. In looking at the example of hydrilla as a submerged aquatic vegetation that has to be removed from a canal, if you use mechanical control to remove all of that hydrilla, generally, how long is it before it repopulates and you have to do that all over again? Or are there interim steps that are taken to keep it from repopulating to the degree that it'll require mechanical control?
Well, that's an excellent question. And if you were to just rely on mechanical control alone and not use an IPM strategy, you know, it depends on the time of year that we're talking about. But if we're talking about, you know, peak summer months where the days are long and the temperatures are high and there's lots of light, you could rebound to that within as short as, you know, 2 months up to, you know, maybe 3 months, depending on nutrient levels in the water. In other cases, it might take many more months for it to get back to something as dramatic as you saw in that photograph. But in practice, the district, again, tries not to allow that to happen in the first place. But if we were to do it, if we had to go in for something like that, we would certainly follow up with spot treatments, very low level applications of herbicides following that mechanical removal to avoid it getting back to that kind of a state in the first place. Because those disturbances, both from the development of hydrilla biomass and the removal, can be quite disturbing on the ecosystem. So we try to avoid that.
Thank you. I see that Mariel has her hand raised. Go ahead, Mariel.
Yeah, I was just wondering what kind of success you've seen with the, I guess it's a weevil, I think it's a weevil, for the Brazilian pepper.
Well, excellent question. Thanks for bringing that up. We're really excited about the fact after a couple of decades, believe it or not, of research on Brazilian pepper biocontrol, we now have 2 insects. One has now been approved for release in Florida. It's a thrips, and it was in that photograph. I could go back, but it's basically a small insect that we're hopeful is going to have a huge impact on Brazilian pepper, but we only last year started releasing those insects.
Oh, okay.
So we're still waiting to find out. You know, the biocontrol has a perfect record on not having unintended consequences when we do it properly, but not a perfect record in being successful. We go through a lot of work to get these insects, and then sometimes they just peter out. But we're very hopeful on this particular species that we'll see things. And there's a second insect that's about to be approved by the federal government that we're excited about as well.
Oh, that'll be wonderful. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have one other question, Leroy. This in the integrated pest management system, is there a hierarchy in what you go to first in terms of your tools to eradicate an invasive species? And how do you evaluate that?
So the answer will depend on the status of the weed that we're going after. Most of the species that we've got to in the 80s and 90s were already well established and abundant on the landscape, and we had very few tools to work with. In fact, really mechanical and chemical control were really the only tools that we had. But it's going to be very much dependent on both the species and how abundant it is. So for example, we have a new species on the landscape that is down in southeastern Florida. It's not in your area yet, but we're trying very quickly to eradicate it. It's a mangrove species that's been found at a botanical garden. There, because it's relatively limited in its distribution, we're doing a lot of hand pulling. Occasionally, we may do some small applications of herbicides, but literally just hand pulling like you would in your garden. On the other hand, with Melaleuca, when we started that, we already had a big chunk of the Everglades in major infestation mode. We began with herbicides there, and then where possible, mechanical control. Biocontrol, fire, and some of these other cultural controls tend to happen later in the process. The big guns typically are chemical and mechanical.
I don't see any board members' hands raised on this item. Yvette, do we have any public comment?
So, can you hear me now? Yes, Madam Chair, we have Julian Berghoff, followed by Richard Martinez. Mr. Berghoff,
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you.
I would just ask the presenter, I joined late, I'm not sure what his name was, what he would think about like a lake like Fellsmere Reservoir there, right next to the Stick Marsh that has like, maybe like 80% or higher like hydrilla coverage and one of the most, incredible fisheries that you've got right now in Florida. And I'm also wondering like what management plans you have potentially for the future for that reservoir in particular.
Okay, I think I heard most of the question. I was a little hard to hear you, but what was the location that you were speaking of? Yvette, were you able to hear the location that was referenced?
I'm sorry, I did not. And Mr. Berghoff, we're having, I think your speaker. Can you hear us? I did not hear the location. Do you want?
Okay.
It's
Well, okay, I'm sorry. I couldn't tell which location was being referred to, but I did hear that it was a lake with hydrilla. Yes, so the first of all, depending on which water body we're talking about, this may be under the jurisdiction of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, who we partner with on aquatic invasive plant management in many of our lake systems in Florida. I know that the FWC has done incredible work at Lake Trafford, for example, getting hydrilla under control there. Yes, and generally the strategy would be to combine a combination of mechanical removal and chemical use with certain herbicides to control hydrilla. Once you get it down to a very low level, most agencies will then use spot treatments, very small amounts of herbicides with very aggressive monitoring to look for those small patches and treat them before they become wholesale major infestations. There really aren't a lot of biocontrol options with regard to IPM for hydrilla. There have been some insects approved for release for them, but they really haven't taken the way we've seen with other species in Florida. And beyond that, there's basically are our main control efforts that we would have, would be mechanical and chemical control.
Mr. Berghoff, are you still on the line?
Hello, can you hear me?
Much
I can
better.
hear you now. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. No, I was referencing Fellsmere Reservoir there, and I was using it as an example of a lake that has extremely high density of hydrilla, and is an incredible fishery. And it's kind of a unique example because it has a lot of hydrilla, but also a lot of ditches and edges and deep water access as well. But certainly an example that there's incredibly rich ecosystems with extremely heavy invasive aquatic vegetation is the point that I was trying to make.
Yeah, understood. Yes, and the idea there is to prevent a plant like hydrilla, which can have some pretty profound impacts on, especially for game fishes. One of the things that we found in lake ecosystems, if you allow a plant like hydrilla to completely overtake that water body, you see some very dramatic shifts in fish population sizes and also the sizes of some of the larger game fish. They tend to not be able to make as good of a living, if you will, in those environments because a lot of the prey fish they go after tend to hide in the hydrilla. So you see this big shift from large, bass and things like this to smaller fish as time goes on and the infestation gets worse.
Right. Sure. I mean, yes, sir. That is a story. I mean, that's not necessarily always the case, though, as in with a place like Fellsmere Reservoir, which has it's one of the highest growth rates of largemouth bass that has been seen in Florida ever, is there, and there's an incredibly high density of hydrilla, more so than in really any other public lake I could think of in Florida. There's been studies by folks like Mike Allen at UF that have looked at a lot of stuff that you're talking about. That there's also results in scientific studies that are contrary to what you're saying, and that there are a lot of benefits to allowing invasives to persist. I mean, there's plants such as water lettuce that suppress algal growth. And have really profound properties for changing the condition of the water quality in our lakes. And I think it would be important for organizations to realize that and to not view these plants as something that we need to eradicate, but something that we can use to help heal our water.
Yeah, point very well taken. I appreciate that. And a lot of times those types of conclusions that we draw from different studies have to be taken in context in the water body that we're referring to, and I appreciate that very much. And an example of the floating aquatic species like hot water hyacinth, it is true that as the canopy is blocked, you do see a reduction in algae in the water column. Unfortunately, when you do a massive harvesting of those species after the fact, you tend to see afterwards a increase in blue-green algae, the ones that cause the harmful algal blooms. So again, very much in context and what impacts are important for a given water body. We do need to be thinking about all of those for each specific water body in itself. So I
Great.
appreciate that.
Thank you,
Absolutely.
Mr. Berghoff.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, the next speaker is Mr. Richard Martinez.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
How effective is fire control against Brazilian pepper, and what is the most effective means of control against Brazilian pepper?
So fire can be used very effectively with pepper, assuming that the plant has not already become a dominant in the plant community that in question. It doesn't carry fire very well. But if you're in a situation, if you're a land manager that has sparse scattered Brazilian pepper, it can very much be effective to help push it back. And then after the fire, it will resprout. It's not like you're going to remove Brazilian pepper with fire alone, but it helps to reduce the biomass, force the plant to resprout, and then when you come back with mechanical or chemical, or hopefully in the very near future, biocontrol, they'll be more susceptible to these other control measures. We've seen that in the Big Cypress National Preserve, where they are able to carry large wildfires and prescribed fires, and it has been very effective at reducing scattered Brazilian pepper. Again, once it's become a dominant and basically takes over the entire area, it's often impossible to even ignite with prescribed fire. Probably the most effective ways to control Brazilian pepper right now, especially when it's in very dense stands, is with the use of herbicides or mechanical removal. We do both at the district. Typically, if it's a 100% cover of Brazilian pepper, if we can afford it and equipment can get in without causing a lot of disturbance to the soil, it is nice to be able to shred it all away and haul it off. For other areas where mechanical equipment cannot go, the herbicide triclopyr is widely used. This is one of those herbicides that it's approved for use in aquatic sensitive environments. And we apply a small amount of it to the base of the tree, and that usually does a pretty good job of killing it.
Thank you.
You bet.
Madam Chair, that's the last public speaker.
Well, thank you very much. I don't see any other hands raised on the board. And Leroy, I want to thank you for your excellent presentation, and the public participation was excellent as well with those great questions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks.
The next item on the agenda is for the establishment of the fiscal year 2020-2021 tentative millage rate and budget. With that, Candy, it's yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, fellow board members, and public. Yvette, I'm ready for the next slide, please. So today, as was mentioned, I'm going to give an update on the tentative budget status. We'll go over briefly the revenue sources, a comparison of the revenue compared to the adopted 20 revenues and expenditures for the Big Cypress Basin, the preliminary snapshot, and then today's tentative budget. Then we will end the presentation with a motion to approve a request to the district governing board for the proposed millage rate. Next slide, please. So we always start our presentation off as to the budget development milestones. It's always rewarding to see the ground of success that we have accomplished. Starting back in October, we've had several discussions on the Big Cypress Basin's fiscal year 2021 budget. Next slide, please. Moving us to today to discuss the proposed tentative budget and millage. The next upcoming big milestones is submittal of the August 1st report that's statutorily required that the Big Cypress Basin budget will be included as part of the overall district's submission. And then back in August to approve the final millage rate and fiscal year 2021 budget that will begin October 1 of 2020. Next slide, please. Then September, we have two public hearings. 10th and the 22nd. They are at 5:15 p.m. to then submit or to adopt a tentative budget and millage, the district's overall budget, as well as the final budget adoption millage rate. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, this is a quick snapshot in comparison of revenue sources. You see that the adopted budget for the Big Cypress Basin, fiscal year 2019-20 adopted budget was $13.9 million, with the ad valorem taxes being the largest portion of the revenues. Same theme for the preliminary budget preliminary budget was $15.3 million, ad valorem taxes being 71%. And then the budget that we are proposing today is at $14.3 million, with the ad valorem taxes at 77% of the budget. You see a slight increase of $104,000 between the preliminary and the tentative budget. That is based on the taxable values that we received July 1st, last Wednesday, for Collier County. Also, from the last discussion that we had pertaining to the 2021 tentative budget, in addition to the ad valorem tax revenue change, there is a slight change in the investment income because of how the market right now looks, and it's forecasted to remain over the next year to two. Brokers that support the South Florida Water Management District and our treasurer recommended that we do reduce our investment income. So we have reduced it down to $150,000 from this year. You have $200,000 in investment income. The remaining balances are pretty much in line, with a little less usage of fund balance compared to what we thought we were going to use in the preliminary time frame, and that's basically related to the capital program and those discussions that Lucine had during the May board meeting. Next slide, please. So this is where the money goes, the expenses. As you see, they are balanced to your revenues of the tentative budget at $14.3 million. Similar theme as the funding supports flood control operations at 21%, then capital projects at 26% or $3.6 million, and then local regional projects and partnerships at about 14%. And then please note also that reserves, we still have the $2 million reserves in case of an emergency or a hurricane that the Basin Board had set aside to cover those anticipated costs. Next slide, please. So this brings us to the proposed millage rate. The Big Cypress Basin fiscal year 2019-20 adopted millage rate was 0.1192, or converted to $11.92 per $100,000 of taxable value. The fiscal year 2021 rate is at a rolled back rate proposal of 0.1152, or $11.52 per $100,000 of taxable value, for a 0.0% change from the rolled back calculation. And the change from the prior year millage rate is 0.0040, or 40 cents. By rolling back that rate, as I had mentioned when we were looking at the revenue pies, the ad valorem taxes that came in last week does yield an additional $104,100 than what we had estimated at the preliminary time frame, for a total of $10,941,400, and that's discounted for those individuals who may pay their taxes early and take the 4% discount. Next slide, please. And with that, for any board comments before we go to the motion.
Are there any board members who have questions of Candy regarding this budget? Go ahead and raise your hand if you have any comments or questions for Candy. Candy, I'm not seeing any raised hands at the moment, so let's go ahead, Yvette, if there are any public comments on this item.
Madam Chair, I do not see public comments for this item.
Okay, Candy, I had one question regarding what we're seeing, what we can expect in the out years. Do we have any feel for the forecast beyond this budget at this time?
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you for asking that question. Right now, our state economists have not, who work for EDR, Economic Demographic Research, they have not put out any of their estimates yet on a county-by-county basis. They typically release that information around the November-December timeframe. But with that said, staff and myself have been reading articles as well as watching several county board discussions, and the majority of the areas within South Florida are stating that it would behoove us to plan for a flat growth. In other words, keeping in your future forecasting your ad valorem revenue about at the exact same dollar amount, and not anticipating such large growth with new construction, you know, as we have seen over this past cycle. With that said, you know, South Florida is different than many of the other areas in the state of Florida, as well as Collier County. So that's where it's very important and beneficial for us to look at what EDR economists do put out in the November-December timeframe. Again, if we do not see a change in taxable values, what they have been stating is that, you know, you may not see a big change in your taxable values, and if you don't, but you still may see a lag in your collections. And what that means is that, you know, typically maybe people are going to hang on to their funding a little longer versus paying their taxes up front, or there may be people who are disputing their taxable values. So that is something that we will keep an eye on, you know, during the 21 fiscal year to see how those collections do come in, to then anticipate maybe that type of a trend even into the 22 year.
I appreciate that information. The future is a little bit uncertain depending on how we're impacted based upon COVID-19 and that the results of that. So I appreciate that, and we'll learn more, I guess, in November. Board members, we're going to need a motion and a second to approve the proposed millage rate, where we're requesting the district governing board to establish the proposed millage rate at the rollback rate of 0.1152. Could I have a motion, please?
I will make a motion to approve a request to the district governing board to establish proposed millage rate at the rollback millage rate of 0.1152 mils per $1,000 of taxable value and proposed FY 2021 tentative budget.
Thank you very much, Mariel. And do I have a second?
I'll second that, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. This will be a roll call vote as I call your name. Ms. Najon de Laton,
Yes.
Mr. Waters,
Yes.
and I vote yes. So the result of the vote is 3-0, Candy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is board comment. Is there anyone on the board that has a comment at this time? I don't see any raised hands, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is our field station activity report with Juan Bethencourt. Juan, it's all yours.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members, and public. Again, my name is Juan Bethencourt. I'm the BCB Field Station Superintendent, and I will be reporting on the field station activities. Next slide, please. As an overview, I'll be talking about hurricane preparedness, about the rainy season activities, fiscal year fleet replacement status, and the 3-month outlook. The next slide, please. So as part of the hurricane preparedness, we've been doing a series of activities to be ready in case of any event. And some of these activities are the Freddy exercise participation and completion, which is basically an opportunity for us to test our preparedness for an actual emergency, whether it is for a hurricane or any other kind of incident. We do fully activate the district emergency operations center, and we simulate a hurricane strike to the different portions of the district as well as PCB. Then we do have we did an aerial flight inspection, which basically let us have a good overview of our canal conditions. We do a hurricane SOP, which we review and adjust it. We do our structure inspection repairs, structure preventative maintenance, canal preventative maintenance, pump stations preventative maintenance, fleet equipment and vehicles preventative maintenance. And of course, we do a weekly coordination meeting with the PCB water managers to kind of determine our conditions in our canals and facilities. The next slide, please. So as part of the our rainy season activities, I would like to show you some of the cleanup taking place at the 951 canal. In this slide, you can see some of the before, during, and after pictures after we have done the cleanup by our field station personnel. On this specific canal, we collected around 8 cubic yards of garbage between the structures 951 South and 951 North, a distance of around 2 miles. And to give you a magnitude of the amount of garbage we picked up, I want to kind of say that it was around 2 pickup trucks full of garbage that we had to handle. Our next slide, please. Again, as part of the rainy season and continue cleanup of canals, you can see on our GG1 structure, collecting garbage and vegetation from the weed barrier with our convert towboat and our trash truck. And again, you can see some before, during, and after pictures of this cleanup. And also, I would like to mention that in previous years, we have had help from volunteering groups to pick up trash around the canals on the BCB area. But this year, because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to get any help from some of these groups. And of course, it's been basically the field station personnel picking up debris and collecting garbage from most of our canals. The next slide, please. This is another cleanup of the weed barriers done at I-75 #1 weir. And you can see the convert towboat collecting debris and vegetation. And these are some pictures of before, during, and after. Next slide, please. This specific slide is for the Cocohatchee Canal. When after we had the big rain event, we found some erosion along the canal bank. So as part of our canal maintenance and by using our gradle equipment and our dump trucks, we were able to take care of the issue. So you see some before, during, and after pictures of the washout repairs along the bank. Just to give you a magnitude of the or an estimate in a dollar amount of how much we spent for that specific repairs, it was around $3,500 that we spent just to repair that side. The next slide, please. At the Bear Rookery Swamp Park, we cleaned up the ditch right in front of the park that discharges into the Court 3 structure in the Corkscrew Canal. Again, you see some of the pictures of before, during, and after the job was done by our field station personnel. Just to mention, the folks from Crew Land and Water Trust were very happy and appreciative after the job was done by our field station personnel. Next slide, please. As we continue with our structure maintenance, we did install some new Freddy signs along the Corkscrew Canal on structures number 1, 2, and 3, and you can see the pictures on this slide. The next slide, please. Just to give you a quick update, we did receive our new 18 cubic yard dump truck. It came around mid-June, and we're proud to show you on these pictures the quality of the truck that we just got. The next slide, please. So for our 3-month outlook, we're gonna continue on mechanical harvesting of debris and vegetation along our canal banks and weed barriers. Of course, we're gonna be supporting the operational orders, AVOs, throughout the wet season as requested by the water managers. We will continue on our structure inspection program repairs. At this time, I just want to say that we have done 67 out of 105 for fiscal year 20. We will be continuing installation of riprap along canals and canal bank erosion repairs. And of course, we will be painting our different structures and signs throughout the BCB area of responsibility. The next slide, please. So at this point, if anybody has any comments, any questions?
Board members, I had asked Juan to give us an estimate of what that bank repair would cost, in keeping in mind that we do have some other areas that are eroded in the basin that will be in need of repair, so that we can keep that in mind as we look at our budget. Are there any questions or comments by any members of the board? I don't see any hands raised, so we'll go to public comment. Yvette, is there any raised hands from the public at this time?
Madam Chair, no hands are raised.
All right, I see no hands raised from the board members, so we'll go ahead and move on to the water conditions report.
Okay, good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members. As always, it's a pleasure to be here to present the water conditions report since our last board meeting. I'll follow our typical layout for this particular presentation, and we'll just go ahead and jump right into it here. So I'll start off with our 2020 monthly summary, just to kind of give an update on where we've been as far as rainfall for the basin. Since our last board meeting, we finished out May here at about 6.3 inches, which is above our average. And that's mostly due to the early onslaught or early start of the wet season. And then June here, we actually ended a little bit below average. The month was kind of split, as everyone's probably noticed. The last couple of weeks have been oddly dry for our wet season, but we did finish off not too far off with from our average of 8 inches. So we're not too far from normal for the year, about 85% of average. I'll kind of walk through our period of record for each month that we have. So May here, it's, you can see we've got our 6.3 inches in 2020. Compare that with these kind of I like to use this as looking at the extremes and the high variability and how we have to be ready for just about anything at any given month. So sometimes we'll get 9 inches, other times half an inch. And then moving on to June here, we did finish below average, like I mentioned, but 3 years ago we had a whopping 21 inches. So we have to be ready for just about anything. And I believe parts of the East Coast did receive, some areas did receive this type of rainfall. Fortunately, we did not. Moving on to July, which has been pretty lackluster as far as rainfall. This does not take into account the rainfall that happened overnight and this morning. We've had a whopping not even 1/10 of an inch as of the July 4th. So, but we do have, again, more steady rainfall in July, but still variable. So to give a quick summary of the water year, which runs May 1st through April 30th of the following year, just to kind of show where we are for the water year, close to average, only about 1 inch low, 1 inch deficit. Again, the wet season did start on May 15th, as called by our meteorologists. And then I wanted to highlight this kind of dry streak that we've had. We had a pretty abrupt start to the wet season, as we normally do. And then that tapered off quickly around June 22nd. I went and looked at the rainfall for that period. And for the basin, at least, we've only had about 1/2 inch of total rainfall for the basin on average. That's kind of notable. That's only 12% of normal. So that's just kind of notable to see the two extremes. Even in wet season, we can have dry conditions. So moving on from that, I like to mention how much each of our structures have discharged out the tide for flood control purposes. And I updated it this month to start our new water year from May 1st, and this is through the 4th. And I think it's important to kind of note when these started discharging for flood control purposes for the basin. Cocoa 1 up here on Immokalee Road and Henderson Creek 1 down here off of Collier Boulevard basically started discharging at the early part of June. So it took 1/2 a month for really that area to fill up and start discharging. GG1 and Facky Union number 1 started late May. And then our Picayune restoration project, the 1 pump station we have operational, that really didn't stage up until late June. And we finally were able to switch those on and start some restoration flows out of the system there. So this is the new slide I added last month. It kind of gives you a snapshot of how our system's doing hydrologically compared to normal for this time of year. So again, the colors of the canals and the areas here on the left represent the percentile classes of that particular water body for this day and time. So for example, for GG1 all the way up here to GG4, we're in the black, then the 90th percentile. So we've raised water levels kind of as we can due to the dry conditions we've had. So you do see a lot of blacks and blues representing that we're trying to hold more water in the system since we haven't had a lot of meaningful rainfall in the last 2 weeks. As far as the Corkscrew Regional system to the north, this one's kind of a split bag. We've got a couple, we got 4 of these surface and groundwater wells that are below the 10th percentile for this time of year, which is not, it's like I mentioned before, it's uncommon to have this little rainfall in the height of the wet season. So that's representative here. And these areas in the eastern side, that we've had a little bit more rainfall in this particular area, so it may not react as quickly. It kind of gives you a good snapshot of what the basin looks like hydrologically and kind of what our strategy is as far as water movement. So now I'll just stair step through the system and kind of show you the trends of where we like to be and where we've been. So starting here at GG1, the blue line is the current year, 2020. It's the water level each day. As I mentioned, we've been here in the wet season, here in this blue shaded area. As of late, we've moved the levels actually up out of that into this dry season level to try and retain as much water as we can in the system while still maintaining our flood control levels in case we do get a thunderstorm like we did this morning. So the system still operates. Moving up the system to GG4, this is a little less, it doesn't react as quickly as GG1. So we've got a little bit of actual drawdown here where the levels are receding. But like I'd like to point out, the levels are still within the green, which is our normal. It falls in that range 50% of the time. So as long as we're in that kind of green area, we're not too far off from normal for the time. Moving north to the Cocohatchee, you can kind of see the fluctuations in the headwater here. We were maintaining flood control releases here, and then as the dry spells happened, we increase the water levels to retain water, still within our normal operational ranges. Moving upstream a little bit, you can see how this one, Coco 3, really recedes with the lack of rainfall in the area. And this is a result of not much direct rainfall, and our Corkscrew area has not staged up at all either. So it's not receiving any flows from Corkscrew, or it hasn't received direct rainfall. But we're still in the green area, so we're still pretty good for this time of year, although I would like to see some rain soon. So moving further south down here to FAC Union number 1, this area was well above the 75th percentile, and it's also declining with lack of rainfall. And moving up the system, I wanted to highlight this one since I kind of opened it last board meeting. We did have a drought ongoing in May, which seems like so long ago, it seems. But this area here in particular does get drier than some of the others. So I highlighted some of the areas that this has happened, historically in 2008 and 9. And then here's what it looked like in May of 2020. And then that same location, really, it has filled in. It's not completely full, but it has recovered from the drought. This was taken in June. So I just wanted to highlight that even though it was low for a time, it does respond quickly to the rainfall we have. And then I just wanted to highlight that this is that same area that I just spoke about. You could see how low it gets here in the dry season normally, and that quick ascension up. But with the lack of rainfall, it has started to decline, but hopefully we'll see some rainfall soon, as I'm sure we will, to get us back up to the normal operation range that we like to see. And moving up a little bit further, this one was maintaining the top of the range again, just kind of duplicating or showing that we have started to change into dry season mode, which can happen any time of year, not just the winter time. Okay, so jumping back to Henderson Creek 1, this area here has started discharging, like I said, in early June, right about this point, but levels are starting to decrease, and unless we get some additional rainfall, releases to tide here will cease soon. And moving up towards Henderson Creek 2, up by I-75, we were hitting early high levels early in the wet season, but as this area does, it does draw down pretty quickly due to the how porous the ground is here. We try to keep this one as high as we can to help some of the wetlands in the area stage up throughout the summer. So to talk about moving over to our Picayune pump station, Merritt pump station over here. This area, we did let it stage up. As you can see, it did go up to about towards the upper part of our operational range. At that point, we felt it was important to bring the flood control levels back down. And this is when we started our restoration pumping. And now we've kind of held steady near the 75th percentile, or between the 75th and maximum for this particular area. So now we've looked at surface water. I'll kind of touch on groundwater conditions. These all have recovered nicely from our lows that we had back in May. I would note that we've had one well that has receded back into the low concern indicator. That one's over here at Immokalee and Airport Road area. It has declined some, especially in the last 2 weeks to really a new minimum, but you can kind of get it's not too far off from where we normally are for a dry condition. If you look back here at April, May. So it's not really concerning yet, especially since there's more rain on the horizon, I'm sure, and these levels will respond quickly to direct rainfall. So now that we've looked kind of underground and where we've been, I want to just glance at the long range outlook. Here you can see our July 2020. This is from the Climate Prediction Center. They're predicting above average chance for above average rainfall for really the remainder of the wet season. These have a tendency to change with time. They don't necessarily stay this nice green color. So just because it says above average, it's kind of a planning tool. But with as dry as it's been, I don't want to necessarily count on that rainfall happening either. Now, so that's the long range, and I'll look at the short range weather outlook. It did rain this morning, but here we are. You can kind of see we are in wet season pattern. But if you look at the kind of rainfall, the grays and the browns are really less rainfall, and we're still kind of in a drier pattern for the BCB area. I did want to note here on the bottom left, the hurricane center. This has been pretty quiet over the last couple of weeks. There hasn't been any really disturbances or anything, but I did see these pop up, and just want to throw it up there that we do start to see an uptick in activity that we do keep our eye on daily. But none of these systems are expected at this point to have any impacts, of course, to us. And with that, I will end, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Brad. That was an excellent report. I particularly like the additions that you've made to your presentation. And I think that they really help me understand the complexity of managing water in the basin, but I hopefully they'll be assisting our members of the public to understand as well. Are there any board questions or comments for Brad at this time? I don't see any hands raised, but if there is a question, please raise your hand. Okay, we'll go to Yvette with public comment. Is there any public comment?
Madam Chair, there's no hands raised for public comment.
Okay, great. I still don't see any board's hands raised. So thank you, Brad, for your excellent report, and we'll move on to the staff reports. The first staff report is Candy Heater for our monthly financial report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The monthly financial report that is posted out on the web and in your package is through the month of May. The tax collections are at 99%. As of today, you are over 100% collected. So that is a good news story that you have collected all of your revenues that you had anticipated in your ad valorem taxes. Moving on to the investment earnings. The investment earnings, you through the month of May have collected $156,000 out of a $200,000 proposed revenue for your 20 budget. And that is about 78% collections. So that is also looking good. You are about 128% collected. You're over your recurring or your new operating revenues, and that's due to the FEMA funding that has been received related to Hurricane Irma expenses that was submitted by your finance department. And that we have been approved and received from FEMA or Department of Emergency Management through the state. On your expenditures, you spent thus far about $5.6 million through the month of May, and $8 million is encumbered. That's about $13.6 million that is committed. So all in all, everything is looking positive, and that concludes my report.
Thank you for your report, Candy. Do any of the board members have a question for Candy on the monthly financial report? I don't see any hands raised, Candy. Thank you again. We'll move on to the Basin Administrator's report. Lisa Keeler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Board members, I wanted to give you an update today on our vegetation removal project on the Golden Gate Main, specifically in the area from our GG1 structure to the airport pulling bridge. Next slide, please. So if you remember, this graphic shows what we were proposing. You'll see on the left-hand side an example of what we had before or what exists today, and then on the right-hand side of the screen would have been what was being proposed, which was removing trees and large hedges, tall hedges, within the easement of 20 feet. And as you're aware, there was a lot of concerns about this project as the drainage easement had just been obtained about a year ago. The residential lots here are very shallow with mature landscaping that had been planted well before the easement was obtained. And so clearing the entire easement presented significant issues to the homeowners. Next slide. So under your leadership, Madam Chair, and Commissioner Taylor's, we took a closer look at the proposed work and came up with a new proposal for the canal right-of-way maintenance, just in this area only. So what you'll see is, again, an example on the before of what kind of landscaping might be out there, and the new proposal showing removal of all vegetation on the canal bank, and then trees only in the area from top of bank back 5 feet. And we made that proposal to Commissioner Taylor in mid-June. And then Commissioner Taylor then held a Zoom meeting with the residents in the area where this proposal was presented. And it was met with much, positive, feelings about the new approach. So next slide, please. So next steps. At that meeting, Commissioner Taylor asked that we go out and tag the trees so that the residents would have a very clear understanding about what this new 5-foot proposal would actually look like. And I'm pleased to say, I was out with staff last week. We've already tagged the trees in this area. We've talked to many of the homeowners in that along that reach. And we've even had a few homeowners come out and ask us to take down additional trees that are maybe a little bit further back than the 5 feet, still within the drainage easement, but the trees are older. They're already having problems with branches coming down. So we're looking at removing those additional trees as well. The next step is really the big important one. In order for us to leave the rest of that easement alone, the Board of County Commissioners has to approve this new proposal. And that will be on their agenda next Tuesday on July 14th. And with that action, they will then implement an easement use agreement for that remaining 15 feet. It is a document that they currently already use in their drainage easements when there are, whether it's vegetation or structures or fire pits or air conditioning units or things like that. So it's a process that they've already established. And so they'll be deciding next week to move forward with that. Then we will be, and assuming it gets approved, we'll be working through our procurement and contractual process to secure a contractor. We will send new letters out to the homeowners, telling them of the new proposal, as well as the name of our contractor, the start date, as well as our finish date. And then county staff will also begin that execution of those easement use agreements. And that'll be a 3-party agreement with Bears Paw, each property owner, Collier County. And those also will get recorded on the property. And everything going as laid out, then we would begin the project and remove the trees still this wet season is our hope. And that's my update. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Lisa. And board members, you'll recall from our last meeting when we heard from several residents in this area. And I know that several of you on the board had concerns about how we could work to come to common ground. There's been a lot of work. And I see Mariel has her hand raised. Go ahead, Mariel.
Hi, I just wanted to thank Ms. Keeler and the Basin staff and some of the West Palm staff and County Commission who are working hard to try to help these people out. And just a little bit of just a little bit of working together seems to have made a huge difference, and I hope they feel the same way. And I just wanted to say thank you. That was it.
Thank you. Dan, I see your hands raised.
Yes, ma'am. And basically to echo what Muriel just said. So thank you to Lisa and everybody else that worked on bringing this to resolution, because it sounds like everybody's satisfied. And so thank you much for the hard work on it.
Well, I certainly can say that it was a team effort on the part of the staff, not only Lisa Keeler and the Basin staff, but also the headquarters staff. And it's really great to see the board's direction executed, and the staff really went to work on it. So I job well done. I got to tell you that, and we'll see how it goes, and then we can evaluate. But it's took a while, but it was great to see everyone work together to come to the common ground. So thank you.
It was. Thank you very much.
Any other comments or questions from the board members for Lisa on anything? I see Dan's got his hand up. Go ahead, Dan.
No, ma'am, that was left up, so I just took it down. Thank you, though.
Okay. All right. No problem. Okay, let's go to general public comments. Members of the public, if you would like to speak, you may use the raise the hand feature in Zoom. Or if you're using a phone and would like to comment, please press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute yourself. And when you're called on, staff will unmute your line for you. The guideline is 3 minutes for your comments. And Yvette, do we have any members of the public who would like to speak?
Madam Chair, no hands are raised.
Okay, we'll give them a few more seconds. And if you see no hands, we'll go ahead and move on.
None at this time.
Okay, we'll go on then to final board comment. Are there any members of the board who have a comment at this time?
Ma'am.
Muriel, I don't see your hand up, but I saw you jump to the top. Did you have a comment?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. I had one thing for the board. In the state budget that the governor signed last week, there is a requirement for the South Florida Water Management District to complete a study of the Big Cypress Basin boundary and make a recommendation on the most appropriate geographic boundaries. So that was in the budget, and the district hydrologist will be completing the study and keeping the BCB board and the South Florida Water Management Board engaged through the process. And I wanted to let you know that because, as you recall, we had visits by Estero and Bonita Springs last year about this very issue. And so I wanted to let you know that that is going to be underway here shortly, and I'll keep you posted on that. Are there any other comments or questions by anyone on the board? I'd like to thank both Dan and Muriel for your service to the Big Cypress Basin Board. It's truly a pleasure to serve with you. And I just wanted to put that on the record because you've just been tremendous this year. And I want to thank you personally for your service to this board. And thank you everyone who participated in today's meeting. I appreciate the professional efforts and the support by the staff. And with that, we're adjourned.